Hi, I'm Kate with For the Love, and today we're going to talk about being verbs with adjectives and action verbs in our Learning to Write program. So I'm going to click on the topic in the table of contents. The first page I come to is the past, present, and future tense being verbs. I have separated these out using pronouns because they are slightly different depending on which pronoun you are using. If you are going to use a noun, you would use the it or they version of the verbs. And that is a teacher page for your reference. Now we get to our student page. You can print this out for your students or they can copy the chart into their writer's notebooks. Students have already learned how to use adjectives to describe a noun when they come before the noun, such as the tall lady. But now we are going to use adjectives after a being verb. It says a being verb helps us give more information about a noun. We can use an adjective after a being verb to describe the noun. We can also use an adjective after a being verb to describe a pronoun. The form of the being verb depends on the noun or the pronoun in the sentence and the tense of the verb. These are past tense verbs. So in the being verb, you're going to have your students use the past tense verb for this activity because it says past tense at the top. Okay, so they're given the pronoun, they're given the adjective, and they just need to put in the being verb. This is explicit instruction that you're going to have to tell your students. They will not know how to do this until you go through it with them. Here's the answer key, what it should look like. Notice that the biggest difference here is it plural or singular? I am one person, that's singular, so I use was. They is plural, so it uses were. You we use as plural as well. Okay, now that students have that information, they are ready to write some sentences. Our word bank here has articles, it has nouns and pronouns, it has the being verbs, was or were, and then it has some adjectives. Now, your students don't necessarily need every category from the word bank in order to write a complete sentence. Remember, we do not use articles with pronouns. We don't have to use articles with plural nouns, but we can use the article the. So students, the more we learn, the more choices they are going to have to make during the sentence practice. You want to make sure that you go over this with students before they start writing. Writing is not an activity that we just follow the same pattern every time. We are constantly making choices. And the nice thing about this program is that we're giving students just a little bit of choice each time so that they will be successful as they are writing their sentences. Notice we still have our mechanics checklist. We want to make sure students are writing correct sentences every time. Okay, here are some sentence examples that you can use as you build anchor charts or as you give students examples before they write their own sentences. Now we're going to practice using adjectives after a present tense being verb. The only thing that changes in these sentences is that the being verb is going to be in the present tense. And again, this is something explicitly you're going to have to teach your students. They are not automatically going to know this. Notice that we have more options of being verbs in the present tense. Specifically, I becomes am. And then we have is and are for singular and plural. Nouns and pronouns, you being considered plural. Once students have that information, they can write their practice sentences. Again, they are not going to necessarily use every part of the word bank to write complete sentences. And here are some sample sentences you can give students using the present tense being verb. And here we have some examples of pronouns and different tenses of being verbs and the adjective. Finally, we have our future tense being verbs. The only thing that changes here is that your being verb will be in the future tense. You will have to explicitly show your students how to do this. To make a future tense action verb, we have will followed by the present tense of the action verb. Being verbs are a little bit different. We have will and then be for a being verb. Here, students are going to use the word bank to write sentences with future tense being verbs. Remember, they won't need every part of the word bank for every sentence. And here are some examples of future tense being verbs followed by the adjective. Okay, now we're going to talk about action verbs after being verbs, and we're going to start out with past tense. This is not all one lesson. You wouldn't do this all in one day, but it is grouped together so that you and your students can see how all of this is related. Instead of learning 5 different lessons, you are learning parts of one lesson. Here is the student page. Notice that students are given an explanation of the being verb and the action verb. And then in the chart, they are given either a noun or a pronoun. We start with pronouns and then we have a few nouns over there, a singular noun and a plural noun. They are going to pick a past tense being verb. You are going to have to give them this information most likely, and then an action verb that they have more experience with. And here's what it will look like when it is done. Notice that at the end of the action verb, we add ing to the end. This is new. Students have not had ing at the end of their action verbs, so you will need to explicitly show them how to do this. Once they have completed their chart, they have the information they need to write complete sentences with action verbs after being verbs. This type of sentence with a past tense being verbs means that the person was doing that thing at that moment in the past. Here are some examples that you can use for anchor charts or as you are giving examples to your students. And then here we're going to do the exact same thing, but now we are using present tense being verbs and action verbs. The being verbs that we are using are the same as the being verbs we used with adjectives. We are just following them up with an action verb with ing at the end instead of the adjective. Again, you will probably have to give your students this information explicitly, and then they will have it and they will be able to write sentences using it. You'll have to judge for your students how much independence you're going to give them as they work on these charts. But we want to make sure that the charts are correct because the charts are what they will look at as they write their complete sentences. And that's the point of the whole program, is to be writing grammatically correct complete sentences. Here is the word bank for the present tense being verbs and action verbs and the sentence practice. Here are sample sentences using the present tense being verb and the action verb. And then we have the student page for the future tense being verbs and action verb. And then their sentence practice. By the time you get to this lesson, students know the routine. They just need the information in order to apply it. It will definitely be a situation in which you can give whole group instructions. Some students will be ready to go, and some you're going to have to pull back for more direct instruction from you and practice in front of you. So that is it for being verbs and adjectives and being verbs and action verbs.